Writing part 1 of 4. I want you to think about the one person in your life who knows everything. Not everything like your coffee order, your Netflix password, the name of the guy you had a crush on in 10th grade. I mean everything. The thing you've never said out loud to anyone else. The thing that lives in the part of you that you keep the lights off in. The person you trusted with that thing. Now imagine finding out they've been sharing it. Not maliciously. Not out of hatred or jealousy or some desire to hurt you. Just sharing it, quietly, one person at a time, over months, because they decided they knew better than you what you needed. That's what this story is about. And I want to be careful about how I tell it, because the person at the center of it meant the world to me. In some ways, still does, which is exactly what makes it complicated. Let me start where it started, or where I realized it had started, which is not the same thing at all. The party was at a house on Clement Street. One of those narrow college rentals where every room is slightly too small and the living room becomes a different place, entirely after 11 p.m. I'd been there maybe an hour. I wasn't really in the mood to be there, if I'm honest. I'd gone because my friend group was going, and staying home alone on a Friday felt like surrendering to something I didn't want to name. So I went. I stood in the kitchen with a drink I wasn't really drinking and talked to people I half knew and did the social maintenance that you do at parties when you're present in body but not entirely in mind. His name was Marcus. I knew who he was. We had a class together the previous semester. Sat on opposite sides of the room. Exchanged maybe 40 words total across 4 months. He was friendly in that low-effort way some people are. The kind of person who never made you feel unwelcome without making you feel particularly welcome either. He came up beside me at the kitchen counter, grabbed a drink, and said something about the music. I said something back. Normal party conversation, the kind you forget while you're still having it. And then he said it. Hey, Jade mentioned you're gay. That's cool, man. I've got a few friends you might vibe with if you're ever looking to meet people. He said it the way you'd say I heard you're into hiking or I heard you transferred from state. Completely casual, like it was just a fact about me that existed in the world. Available to anyone who knew where to look. I remember the exact feeling. Not in my chest, lower than that. Somewhere in my stomach. Like the floor of it had just given way. I remember the music being loud and the room being warm and none of that registering properly because my brain had stopped processing external information and turned entirely inward. I said something. I don't remember what. Something neutral. Something that bought me enough time to put the drink down on the counter and say I needed some air. I got outside. Stood on the narrow front porch with my hands in my jacket pockets. The street was quiet compared to the inside of the house, a car passing, someone laughing somewhere half a block away. The ordinary sounds of a Friday night that had no idea what had just happened to me. Jade mentioned you're gay. Yada. I want to tell you about Jade before I go any further, because you need to understand what she meant before you can understand what this did. We met sophomore year. In a creative writing elective that neither of us expected to take seriously, and both of us ended up caring about too much. She sat 2 rows ahead of me and spent the first 3 weeks of class arguing with the professor about story structure in ways that were equal parts annoying and compelling. I introduced myself after class one day not because I was trying to make a friend, just because I had something to say about what she'd said and I couldn't not say it. That was it. That was the whole beginning. A conversation about narrative structure that turned into walking to the same dining hall, that turned into 2 hours at a corner table, that turned into the kind of friendship that builds itself faster than you expect and settles deeper than you planned. Jade was sharp in the way that some people are sharp, not sharp like an edge, sharp like a clarity. She noticed things. She remembered things. She had this quality of attention that made you feel genuinely seen when she turned it toward you. And I had spent enough of my life feeling invisible in the specific way that closeted people feel invisible, present, but not quite whole, that being seen felt enormous. I told her I was gay on a Tuesday night in October of our junior year. We were in her car in the parking lot of a grocery store because she'd offered to drive me, and then we'd sat in the parking lot talking instead of going inside for 45 minutes, which was normal for us. The thing I remember most is that I hadn't planned to say it. I'd been carrying it for months, the decision about whether to tell her. The practice runs in my head, the careful calculation of risk versus relief. And then she said something unrelated, something about a book she was reading, and I just said it. I'm gay. I've known for a long time. I haven't told anyone. She turned the car off, which sounds like a small thing, but it wasn't. She turned the car off and turned toward me and gave me the full version of that attention I just described. Not a big reaction. Not tears or a long speech, or the kind of response that makes the moment about the person receiving the information. She just looked at me and said, "Okay, I love you. Do you want to go get those groceries now, or do you need a minute?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was exactly right. The exact weight the moment needed. Not too heavy, not dismissive, just, "I receive this. I'm not going anywhere. What do you need?" I said I needed a minute. She said, "Okay." We sat there for another 20 minutes talking about nothing and everything, and when we finally went inside to get the groceries, I felt lighter than I had in months. Years, maybe. The specific lightness of putting something down after carrying it for so long you'd forgotten what it felt like to have your hands empty. After that, Jade was the person, the one who knew. I told her things I hadn't told anyone else, not because she pushed for them, but because having one person who knew made it easier to think out loud. We talked about what it was like to grow up knowing and hiding. We talked about my family, my parents, who were not unkind people but who existed inside a set of assumptions I had never figured out how to safely challenge. We talked about timing and readiness, and the question of what coming out actually meant when your hometown was the kind of place where certain things were technically accepted and practically complicated. She was patient with all of it. That was what I thought. She listened. She asked good questions. She never pushed. Or so I thought. Standing on that porch on Clement Street, I did the thing your brain does when it's trying to locate the ground again after a fall. I went back. Mentally. Started looking for the moments I'd missed. Because here's the thing about what Marcus said. The first word that broke me wasn't gay. It was mentioned. Such a small, casual word. Jade mentioned, like it was something she'd brought up in passing. Like it was hers to bring up. I stood there and I thought about the past year. About interactions that had been slightly off in ways I hadn't been able to place at the time. A guy in our friend group named Tyler, who'd made a comment about a TV show, something about a gay character, and glanced at me just a fraction of a second longer than he needed to. A girl named Priya who'd been slightly too careful around the subject of relationships when I was in the room, in the way people are careful when they know something and are trying not to let on that they know. A conversation at a bar 3 months ago where someone had said "your people" in reference to something, then looked embarrassed and moved on too quickly. I had filed all of it as coincidence, as oversensitivity, as the particular paranoia of someone who was used to being slightly more aware of how they were perceived than the people around them. Standing on that porch, I started refiling. I pulled out my phone. My hands were not entirely steady. I opened my texts with Jade. 3 years of messages. The most active thread in my phone by a significant margin. And I typed 4 words. "Did you tell anyone?" I looked at it for a second. Then I hit send. The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, which meant she was on her phone, which meant she saw it right away. They pulsed for a few seconds. Then they disappeared. No message came through. I stood there on the porch and watched the screen. A minute passed. Maybe 2. The party continued behind me. Bass through the walls. Someone laughing too loud at something near the front window. The street in front of me stayed quiet. The dots didn't come back. I put my phone in my pocket. I looked at the street. I thought about a grocery store parking lot on a Tuesday in October, and a car engine turning off, and the specific feeling of being seen by someone you trusted. I didn't go back inside the party. I walked home. It was cold enough that I should have called a ride, but I needed the air and the movement and the 22 minutes of just putting one foot in front of the other without having to be a person who was having a reaction. I could be a person who was just walking. Just going from one place to another in the dark. My apartment was quiet when I got back. Roommate out. I sat on the edge of my bed without turning the lights on and held my phone in both hands and looked at the screen. No reply from Jade. I thought about mentioned. The casualness of it. The way Marcus had said it, like he expected me to already know that he knew. Like it was established information. I put my phone face down on the bed beside me. The room was dark and quiet and mine, and I sat in it and tried to locate the feeling that was building in my chest, tried to find the right word for it, the right shape. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something earlier than anger. The stage before it, where you're still hoping you've gotten the math wrong. I picked up the phone again, turned it over. The screen was dark, still nothing from Jade. She called at 9:14 the next morning. I know the exact time because I'd been awake since 7. Lying in bed watching the ceiling get lighter as the sun came up. phone on my chest like I was waiting for something I wasn't sure I wanted to receive. When it finally buzzed and her name appeared on the screen, my first reaction wasn't relief. It was the specific tension of a person who has been bracing for impact, and finally hears the thing starting to move. I let it ring twice before I answered. Hey. Her voice was careful. Not the careful of someone who didn't know what they'd done. The careful of someone who had spent the night figuring out how to talk about it. Hey, I said. A pause. Short but present. Can we talk in person? I looked at the ceiling. Yeah, I said. We can do that. We met at a coffee shop near campus neutral ground, the kind of place we'd spent hundreds of hours in over 3 years, which I think she chose deliberately. Familiar surroundings, soft edges. I got there first and picked a table in the back corner, away from the window, and ordered something I didn't want and wrapped both hands around the cup because I needed something to hold on to. She came in 12 minutes later. I watched her spot me from across the room, watched her face do the thing it did when she was managing herself. The slight composure that sat over her natural expression like a second layer. She came over and sat down across from me and put her bag on the floor and looked at me with those clear, paying attention eyes that I had loved for 3 years. Noah, she said. Just tell me, I said. Don't start with context or explanation. Just tell me if it's true. She didn't look away. That was the thing about Jade, she didn't flinch when things got hard. I had always admired that about her. Sitting across from her in that coffee shop, I found it slightly harder to admire. Yes, she said. I told some people. The cup in my hands was warm. I focused on that for a second. The warmth. Something physical and real to anchor to, while the inside of my chest did whatever it was doing. How many? I said. Not a question. A request for a number. She hesitated. A few people in our friend group. People who I thought. How many, Jade? She folded her hands on the table. 7 or 8. Over the past, it's been gradual. It wasn't all at once. 7 or 8. I sat with that number. It was bigger than I'd prepared myself for, which meant I'd prepared myself for something, which meant some part of me had already suspected it was more than 1 or 2. Why? I said. She exhaled. And here's where it got complicated, because what she said next was not what I expected. I had prepared for guilt, for apology, maybe for some version of defensiveness. What I hadn't prepared for was sincerity, because I was worried about you, she said. I watched you go through the last 2 years carrying this, and I kept thinking about what would happen if something came up, if you had a moment where you needed support from people around you and nobody knew. I wanted there to be people ready, people who could be there for you when you were ready to let them. She said it steadily. She believed it completely. I could see that she believed it, and that was the part that made my hands tighten around the cup. You didn't ask me, I said. I know. I told you specifically multiple times that I wasn't ready, that I needed to control the timing. You knew that. I know, she said again, softer this time. So when you say you were worried about me, I stopped. Tried to find the right words. Not the angry ones, not yet the precise ones, because precision felt important. What you actually mean is that you decided your judgment about what I needed was more accurate than mine. Something moved through her expression at that, not quite flinching, but adjacent to it. That's not how I thought about it. How did you think about it? I thought about it as building a safety net, quietly, without making it a big thing. She leaned forward slightly. Noah, every single person I told, they responded with complete support. None of them treated you differently. None of them said anything to you because I asked them not to. I was careful about who I chose. You chose, I said. Yes, that's the part you're not understanding. My voice was still even. I was working to keep it that way. You chose, not me. You took the thing I gave you in confidence and you made a series of choices with it that I didn't know about and didn't agree to. And you're explaining it to me now like the outcome justifies the method. She was quiet, and maybe everyone you told is fine with it. Maybe they're all supportive and wonderful and nothing terrible happened. I set the cup down carefully. But that's not the point. You didn't get to make that calculation. It wasn't yours to make. The coffee shop moved around us. Someone ordered something at the counter. A chair scraped. The ordinary sounds of a Saturday morning, occurring in a different universe from the one where Jade and I were sitting in a back corner having this conversation. I'm sorry, she said. The apology was real. I could see that too. Her eyes had gone slightly wet at the edges and she wasn't performing it. Jade didn't perform things. That was part of what I'd trusted about her. The apology was genuine and it landed in me and it didn't fix anything, which was its own kind of information. I know you are, I said. I genuinely thought. I know what you thought. I looked at her. Asterisk. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I believe you thought it was the right thing. I believe you thought you were helping, and it's still times I stopped. Started again. You still took something from me. Good intentions don't change what the thing actually was. She pressed her lips together. Nodded once. Small. We sat there for a moment without talking. The gap between us felt different from any gap we'd had before, not the comfortable silences of people who knew each other well enough not to fill every second, but something with more weight in it. Something that was going to require more than this one conversation to move. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Yeah? How did you find out? Marcus, I said. At the party last night. He mentioned it the way you'd mention someone's major. She closed her eyes briefly. I didn't tell Marcus directly. He must have. She shook her head. It spread further than I intended. Further than you intended. I repeated. Noah. So you told 7 or 8 people, and it spread, and you didn't know. And I found out from someone I barely know at a party on a Friday night. She didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say to that, and she knew it. I picked up my cup again, not to drink, just to have something in my hands. I looked at the table between us and tried to do something useful with the feeling that was building in my chest. It had graduated from the pre-anger stage now. It was the real thing, but underneath the anger was something older and quieter. And I could feel that too, and I didn't want to go near it yet. How long has this been happening, I asked. She looked down at her hands. The first person I told was about 8 months ago. 8 months. I let that sit. 8 months ago I had still been having conversations with Jade about timing, about how I was thinking through the coming out process, about what felt safe and what didn't, and while we were having those conversations, she had already started. She had already taken the first step of a process that was supposed to be mine, and she had sat across from me in this same coffee shop or her apartment or wherever we were, and listened to me talk about my own timeline, while already operating on a different one. 8 months, I said. Yeah, and in that 8 months, you never thought to tell me you'd done it. I kept thinking I would, she said. And then it never felt like the right time, and then it had been too long. And it was easier not to. She didn't argue with that. I leaned back in my chair. The anger was there, solid and present, but it wasn't the explosive kind. It was the slow-burning kind. The kind that goes deep into the wood and stays there long after the surface looks like it's cooled. That kind is harder to resolve, and I knew it. I need to ask you something, I said. And I need you to answer me honestly. She looked at me. Is there anyone you told who is connected to my family? The shift in her expression was small, but I knew her well enough to catch it. A barely perceptible change in her stillness. The kind of change that means a person's internal processor has just been handed something it needs to handle carefully before responding. That shift lasted 2 seconds. 2 seconds was a long time. Yade, your brother reached out to me, she said. A few months ago. He said he'd been worried about you and he asked me directly if there was anything he should know. He said he already had a feeling. She met my eyes. I didn't think it was my place to lie to him. The coffee shop kept moving. Someone laughed near the front. The espresso machine ran through a cycle. I sat very still. My brother, I said. He reached out to me, Noah. Daniel reached out to you. Yes. And you told him? A pause. I confirmed it. You told him? My voice had gone quiet in a different way now. Not controlled quiet. Just reduced. Like something had turned a dial down. Jade. That's my family. I know. That's not the people in our friend group. That's one thing. That's still wrong. But I stopped. My hands were not steady anymore. I put the cup down before I registered doing it. My brother. You told my brother. He was worried about you. That is not yours. The words came out with more force than I intended, and a few people nearby glanced over and I didn't care. That conversation, that specific conversation that belongs to me, that has always belonged to me. I have been thinking about how to have that conversation for years. Years, Jade. And you. I stopped. I pushed my chair back. Not dramatically, just enough to create distance. I needed a few more inches of air between me and this table and everything on it. Jade's eyes were wet now. properly. She wasn't letting it become crying, but it was close. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Noah, I know," I said. And I meant it, and it didn't help, and I didn't know what to do with either of those things. I looked at her for a moment. This person I had trusted with everything. This person who had turned the car engine off in a grocery store parking lot and given me exactly what I needed in a moment when I hadn't known how badly I needed it. I looked at her and I could see both things at once, who she was to me and what she had done, and holding both of those things in the same space was the most exhausting thing I'd done in a long time. "I need to go," I said. "Noah, please don't. I'm not leaving forever. I picked up my jacket. I need to think. And I can't think here." She nodded. Her jaw was tight with the effort of not crying openly. I stood up, looked at her one more time. "Did you tell anyone else?" I said. "Anyone outside our friend group? Anyone other than Daniel?" She shook her head. "No, I swear." I looked at her for a second longer. Then I asked the question that had been sitting behind all the other questions since she said my brother's name. "Does my brother know about my parents? Does he know I haven't told them?" She was quiet for a moment. "He mentioned," she said carefully, "that he wasn't sure how much they knew. He said he thought your mom might already suspect." "Me, Mom." I picked up my bag. I walked out of the coffee shop into the late morning, and the air outside was cold and bright and completely indifferent. And I stood on the sidewalk and looked at nothing in particular and thought about my mother. Writing part 3 of 4. I called Daniel from my car. Not from the sidewalk outside the coffee shop. I needed 4 walls around me first, even if those walls were just a Civic with 80,000 miles on it, and a cracked dashboard from where I'd dropped my phone 2 summers ago. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine and looked at my brother's name and my contacts for probably 2 full minutes before I pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey." His voice was normal. Warm in the easy way. Daniel's voice was always warm. He had always been the smoother one. The one who could make a conversation feel comfortable before it had any right to be. "What's up?" I didn't know how to start, so I just started. "Did you talk to Jade?" A pause. Short, but I'd been collecting pauses for the last 18 hours, and I knew what they meant now. "Yeah," he said. "I did." "When?" "A few months back. Maybe 4 months ago." Another pause. Different from the first one, this one more careful. "Noah, I reached out to her. She didn't come to me. I want you to know that." "I know," she told me. "Okay." He let that sit for a second. "How are you doing?" That question. 4 words. Completely simple. And something about being asked it by my brother in that specific tone made the inside of my chest do something complicated. Not breaking down, I wasn't going to break down in a parking lot outside a coffee shop at 10 in the morning. But something shifting. Moving. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. I'm still in the middle of figuring out how angry I am. "At Jade?" "At Jade. At the situation." I stopped. "Why did you reach out to her?" He exhaled slowly. I could hear him settling into wherever he was sitting, the particular sound of someone who has been waiting for a conversation, and is now finally in it. "Because I was worried," he said. "You'd been different for a while. Not bad different. Just closed off in a specific way that didn't feel like just being busy. And I didn't know how to ask you directly because every time I tried to bring up anything personal, you redirected it. And I didn't want to push, so you asked my best friend instead. I asked someone who I thought might know if you were okay." His voice was steady, not defensive. "I'm not going to pretend it was the perfect move. But yeah, I did. I looked at the steering wheel. And she told you." She confirmed something I already had a strong feeling about. Yeah, the distinction confirmed versus told felt important, and also somehow beside the point. The result was the same. My brother knew. Had known for 4 months. And in 4 months of phone calls and holiday visits and the ordinary texture of being brothers, he hadn't said anything. "Why didn't you say anything to me?" I asked. "Because it wasn't mine to bring up. Simple. Direct. No hesitation. It's your thing to tell me when you're ready." I wasn't going to force that. I sat with that for a moment. There was something in it that was the opposite of what Jade had done. Daniel had found out, and then held it quietly, kept it in his own hands, waited for me to bring it to him. The difference between those 2 responses felt enormous. It also made something in me ache in a way I wasn't entirely prepared for. "Does it change anything?" I asked. "Between us?" "No," he said. Immediately. "Why would it?" "I don't know. I've spent a long time not knowing how people would." "Noah." His voice was gentle in the particular way older brothers can be gentle when they're not trying to perform it. You're my brother. Nothing about this changes that. Nothing about this was ever going to change that. I pressed my fingers against my eyes, took a breath. Can I ask you something? I said. And I need you to tell me the truth. Yeah. What did you mean when you told Jade you thought Mom might already suspect? The pause this time was the longest one yet. I don't know for certain, he said carefully. But you know how she is. She pays attention to things. She's been softer with you lately. More patient, calling more often. A beat. I don't think she knows. But I think she's been waiting for something without being sure what she's waiting for. I thought about my mother. The specific way she had of loving people, not loudly, not demonstratively, but with a persistent, quiet attention that showed up in small things. Calling on Tuesdays when she knew I had a hard class. Sending food in the mail, actual food, packaged carefully with a note that always said more in what it didn't say than what it did. Being softer lately. More patient. I had read all of it as just her being her. Her regular frequency of love. What if it had been something else? What if she had been trying to tell me something without knowing how to tell me she was trying? She's never said anything, I said. Not once. No. Daniel agreed. She wouldn't. Not until you did first. I stared through the windshield at the parking lot. A woman walked past with a stroller. A guy unlocked a truck 2 spaces away and got in and drove off. The world continuing to operate on its own schedule. Daniel, I said. Yeah? I had a plan for how this was going to go. I'd been building it for years, how I was going to tell you, how I was going to tell Mom and Dad, what I was going to say. When I had a hole, I stopped. I had a picture of it. And now that picture is it's gone. And I don't know how to be okay with that. He was quiet for a moment, not filling the silence with reassurance, not rushing to fix it, just letting it be what it was. I know, he said finally. And I'm sorry. For my part in it. I should have come to you directly instead of going sideways. Yeah, you should have. I know. No defensiveness, no qualification, just acknowledgement. I'm sorry, Noah. I nodded even though he couldn't see it. I know you are. We stayed on the line for another minute, without talking. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the specific quiet of 2 people who have been brothers long enough to know they don't have to fill every second, existing together across however many miles were between us in that moment. Come home, he said finally. Not right now if you're not ready. But soon. I think you need to be here. I hadn't been home in 4 months. The last visit had been rushed a long weekend. Surface level. The kind of visit where you're present but not quite there. I'd been telling myself I'd go back when things felt more settled, when I had more control over the variables. The variables were no longer mine to control. That ship had sailed 4 months ago, apparently, when my brother made a phone call to my best friend. Yeah, I said. Okay, call me when you figure out timing. I will. And Noah? Yeah. For what it's worth, he said, and his voice had shifted slightly, gone to something more careful and more real. I'm glad you're going to be able to stop carrying this alone, even if the way it happened was wrong. I'm glad. I didn't say anything for a second. Then, I'll call you. I hung up, put my phone in my lap, sat in the car for a while longer. I drove home 4 days later. 4 days of sitting with everything. 4 days of going to class and coming home and lying on my bed and staring at the ceiling, which was becoming a habit I was going to have to address at some point. 4 days of not talking to Jade, which felt like missing a limb in the specific way that losing close contact with someone you've talked to every day for 3 years feels like losing a limb. 4 days of thinking about my mother calling on Tuesdays, about what softness meant when it came from someone who communicated mostly in small, consistent acts. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I just packed a bag on a Thursday night and got in my car Friday morning and drove the 2.5 hours home on autopilot. The kind of driving where you arrive and can't entirely account for how you got there. I hadn't called ahead. I don't know why, or maybe I do. Calling ahead meant having to explain what I was coming for, and I didn't know yet what I was coming for. I just knew I needed to be there, in that specific house, in that specific kitchen, near those specific people, even if I had no idea what I was going to say when I arrived. I pulled into the driveway and sat there. The house looked exactly like it always looked. That's the thing about the house you grew up in. It resists your internal weather. It just exists in its own stubborn normalcy. The same shutters, the same crack in the driveway that's been there since I was 12, the same oak tree in the front yard that's slightly too large for the space but that my parents have never trimmed because my dad has a thing about cutting trees. I looked at it for 20 minutes. Cars passed behind me on the street. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere. The October afternoon moved around the outside of my car without asking for anything from me, which I appreciated. I was still sitting there when the front door opened. My mother came out onto the porch. She wasn't dressed like she'd been expecting someone. Jeans, an old sweater, her reading glasses still on top of her head from whatever she'd been doing inside. She stood on the porch and looked at my car in the driveway, and then she looked at me through the windshield, and her expression didn't do what I expected it to do. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had been waiting, and was relieved that the wait was over. She came down the porch steps and across the front walk and stopped at the passenger side of the car. I lowered the window. She looked at me. Just looked at me. The way she looked at things she was taking seriously with full attention, without performance. "Are you hungry?" she said. 3 words. The simplest possible words. And something in them in the specific gentleness of the question, in the way she asked it like it was the only thing that mattered right now, in the echo of a grocery store parking lot 3 years ago where someone else had asked me almost the same thing. Something in all of that broke directly through every layer I had been maintaining for 4 days and kept me in my seat for one more second while I got myself together. I got out of the car. She didn't hug me immediately. She just stood there while I closed the door, and then she fell into step beside me toward the house, close enough that our arms touched. And that was enough. That was the whole thing. That small, deliberate proximity. We went inside. The house smelled like it always smelled something she'd been cooking. The specific warmth of a house that people actually lived in. The familiar geography of every room exactly where it had always been. She went to the kitchen. I sat down at the table, the same table I'd sat at for 23 years, done homework at and eaten breakfast at and had arguments at and been a child at. I put my bag on the floor and rested my arms on the worn wood and looked at the room. My mother moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone in their natural habitat. She didn't ask me anything. She didn't look at me with questions in her eyes or try to set up a conversation or give me the space in a pointed way that meant she was waiting for me to fill it. She just moved through the kitchen, put something on the stove, got down 2 mugs. "Daniel said you might come by," she said. Not accusatory, just information. "He told you I was coming? He said he thought you might need to be here." She glanced over her shoulder. He didn't say when. I looked at my hands on the table. "Mom, Mem, I need to tell you something." She turned around then, not with alarm, with the particular stillness of a person who is clearing space for whatever is about to be handed to them. She leaned against the counter and gave me her full attention and waited. I had rehearsed this conversation hundreds of times. Different versions of it, different settings, different words. I had a version for the car and a version for a walk and a version for a Sunday dinner where I'd planned it all out carefully. The timing, the lead-up, the exact sentence I'd use to open it. I had thought about this moment for years. None of those versions were this one. I looked at my mother in her old sweater with her reading glasses on her head, leaning against the kitchen counter in the house I grew up in on a Friday afternoon that I hadn't planned, and I said, "I'm gay. I've known for a long time. I'm sorry I didn't. Noah." Her voice was soft. "I had a plan for how I was going to tell you, and things happened that, Noah." She pushed off the counter and came to the table and sat down across from me and put both of her hands over mine the way she used to do when I was small and something had gone wrong and she wanted me to know she was there. "I know." I looked at her. "I've known for a while," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure, but I had a feeling, and I've been waiting for you to tell me when you were ready. You never said anything. It wasn't mine to say." She held my gaze. "It was yours." The kettle on the stove started to sound. She didn't move to get it. We just sat there, her hands over mine at the kitchen table, the October light coming through the window above the sink, the ordinary kitchen around us containing something that felt much larger than the space it was in. "Are you angry?" she asked. "That I didn't say something sooner?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I don't think so. Are you okay?" I looked at her, at this woman who had been calling on Tuesdays and sending food in the mail and being softer than usual for reasons I hadn't understood until now. This woman who had known and held it carefully and not once made me feel the weight of what she knew. "Not entirely," I said, "but I think I'm going to be." She squeezed my hands once. Then she stood up to get the kettle. I sat at the table and listened to her move through the kitchen and felt something I hadn't felt in days, maybe longer than that. Not fixed, not resolved, but held, in the way that specific places and specific people can hold you when everything else feels like it's been taken apart. Outside the window, the oak tree moved slightly in the wind. I thought about Jade, about everything still unresolved between us, still sitting in a coffee shop at a table I'd pushed my chair back from, about the conversation I hadn't had yet, the final version of it, the one where I said everything I actually needed to say instead of just the beginning of it. That conversation was still coming, but first, there was tea, and my mother's kitchen, and a Friday afternoon that I hadn't planned but that felt, in spite of everything, like exactly where I was supposed to be. My dad came home around 6. I heard his car in the driveway, the specific sound of the engine cutting off, the particular sequence of the door and his keys and his boots on the porch steps that I had been hearing my entire life. My mother looked up from the stove and didn't say anything, which meant she'd called him at some point during the afternoon and he already knew I was here. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw me at the table. He looked at me the way my dad looked at things that mattered to him directly, without rush, like he was making sure he was seeing it correctly before he responded to it. Then he put his keys on the counter, came over, and put his hand on my shoulder briefly the way he'd been doing since I was small. Not a long gesture, just a landing. Just, "I'm here. I see you. We're okay." He sat down. My mother put food on the table. We ate dinner in the house I grew up in, the three of us, and nobody made it into a moment. My dad asked about school. I answered. My mother told a story about the neighbor's renovation that had apparently been going on for 3 months and was causing everyone on the block mild irritation. My dad had opinions about the city permit process. I laughed at something he said, and the laugh was real, which surprised me. Somewhere between the food and the ordinary conversation, I realized that the dinner I had been afraid of for years, the dinner where everything changed, where the table became a courtroom, where I had to survive the reaction, was not this dinner. This dinner was just dinner, and the coming out I had rehearsed for years, the careful speech, the perfect timing, the controlled environment that had already happened, imperfectly, without my permission, in pieces I hadn't assembled myself, and somehow, the world had not ended. That didn't resolve everything. I want to be clear about that. The fact that my family was okay did not erase the fact that the choice had been taken from me. Those were two separate things living in the same space, and I was going to have to learn to hold both of them without letting one cancel the other out. But sitting at that table, I let myself have the dinner. Just the dinner. The food and the ordinary conversation, and my dad's opinions about city permits and my mother refilling my water without asking. I let myself be in the room with these people who knew me and had quietly decided, each in their own way, to wait. After dinner, my dad and I sat on the back porch while my mother cleaned up inside, which was a thing we had done since I was a teenager. He'd always been better one-on-one than in groups, and the porch had always been where the real conversations happened. We sat in the chairs that had been there for 15 years, facing the backyard, the October dark settling around us. He didn't open with anything heavy. We talked about his work for a while. We talked about my car and the noise it had been making that I'd been ignoring. He told me about a fishing trip he and my uncle had been loosely planning for months. And then, after a while, he said, "You doing okay with everything?" I looked at the yard. "I think so. Still processing some of it." He nodded. "That's fair. Did you know?" I asked. "Before this week." He was quiet for a moment. "I had a feeling," he said. "For a while. Your mother and I talked about it once. We decided we weren't going to bring it up because it felt like it needed to come from you." He paused. Was that the wrong call? I thought about it honestly. About the years I'd spent protecting a secret that had apparently been more transparent than I'd understood. About whether I would have wanted them to bring it up, to open the door from their side. "No," I said. "I don't think so. I think I needed to be the one." I looked at him. "I just didn't get to be." He absorbed that. "Because of Jade." "Yeah." He nodded slowly. Looked at his hands. "That's hard." "It is. You two going to be okay?" I didn't answer immediately. That was the question I'd been sitting with for days, not just whether Jade and I would survive this, but what surviving it would even look like. Whether the friendship that came out the other side would be recognizable as the same thing, or whether it would be something different wearing the same name. "I don't know yet," I said. "I need to finish the conversation with her." "Yeah." He reached over and briefly gripped my forearm the same way he'd gripped my shoulder in the kitchen, that same grounded, landing gesture. Take your time with it. I stayed the whole weekend. It was not a dramatic weekend. It was, in fact, almost aggressively ordinary. My mother and I walked to the farmer's market Saturday morning. My dad and I watched a game Saturday afternoon. We had people over for dinner Sunday in the way my parents sometimes did, neighbors and an aunt and uncle, and the general comfortable noise of people who had known each other for years. I moved through all of it, and nobody made me into a subject, and nobody treated me like something fragile, and nobody said anything that required me to perform okayness I didn't have. Daniel called Saturday night. We talked for an hour. He said he was sorry again, and I believed him again, and we talked about other things too, his job, a trip he was thinking about, the fishing trip with our dad. At the end of the call, he said, "I'm glad you went home." I said, "Yeah, me too." I drove back Sunday evening with the windows down despite the cold because the air felt important. 2.5 hours of highway, and the particular quality of thinking you can only do when your hands are on a wheel and the road is doing most of the work for you. I thought about what I was going to say to Jade. We met on a Wednesday. Her suggestion, she'd texted asking if I was ready to talk. And I'd said yes. And we went back to the same coffee shop because I think we both understood that the conversation needed to happen in the same place it had started. Close the loop in the same room. She was already there when I arrived. Same back corner table. She had coffee in front of her that she wasn't drinking. And she looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping well, which I recognized because I'd been looking at the same thing in the mirror for a week. I sat down. We looked at each other for a moment. "How was home?" she asked. "It was good," I said. "Hard in some ways. Good overall." She nodded. Her hands were wrapped around her cup. Not drinking, just holding. "I'm glad, Jade." I leaned forward slightly, both arms on the table. "I need to finish saying what I started saying last week, because I don't think I got to the actual thing." "Okay," she said quietly. "I'm listening." I took a breath. Not for drama, just to make sure I said it right. I'd been working on this for a week, not rehearsing it, just letting it settle into the right shape. "I know you love me," I said. "I know that everything you did came from a place of caring about me. I am not questioning that, and I don't want you to think I am." I held her gaze. "But here's what I need you to actually understand. Not just apologize for understand." She nodded. Her eyes were already filling, but she was holding it, staying present. "When I came out to you in your car 3 years ago," I said, "that was one of the most terrifying things I had ever done. I had been building up to it for months. I had talked myself out of it probably a dozen times, and when I finally said it, the reason I was able to say it was because I trusted you completely." I paused. "I gave you something I hadn't given anyone. That's what that was. That's the weight of it." "I know," she said. Her voice was careful, tight. "And what you did with it, I understand why. I believe you thought you were building something for me. I believe you thought you were making things safer." I kept my voice even. Not cold. Just honest. "But you took that thing I gave you, and you made decisions with it that I never agreed to. Over 8 months, while sitting across from me and talking about my own timeline like you didn't already know you'd started a different one." I stopped. "That's the part that's hardest to sit with. Not just that you told people, but that you kept having conversations with me about my choices while having already made some of them yourself." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the tears had spilled over quietly. Not dramatically, just the overflow of something that had been held too long. "You're right," she said. "That's exactly right. And I didn't let myself see it that way until you said it last week. And I've been sitting with it since then, and I'm ashamed of it. I am genuinely ashamed." "I don't need you to be ashamed," I said. "I need you to understand why it wasn't okay. Those are different things." "I understand," she said. "I do. What I took from you, the coming out to your family, the control over your own story. I understand that's not mine to give back. I can't fix that, and I'm sorry. Not the reflexive kind of sorry, the kind where I actually—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I understand what I did." I looked at her. At this person who had been my closest friend for 3 years, who had turned off a car engine and said I love you and asked if I wanted fries, who had been patient and present and good in 100 ways, and who had also done the things she'd done. Both of those people were in the same chair across from me, and I had to figure out what to do with that. "I don't know what we are right now," I said. "I want to be honest about that. I don't know if we go back to what we were, or if this is something different now. I know. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I'm not asking you to decide that today. I'm not leaving, I said. I want you to know that. I'm not ending this. But I think it's going to take me some time to figure out how to trust you with things again. And that's the honest truth of where I am. She nodded. That's fair. That's more than fair. She looked at me steadily. I'll wait. Don't wait, I said. Just be my friend. The regular kind. And we'll figure out the rest as we go. Something in her face shifted at that. Not relief exactly, something more complicated than relief. Something that had grief in it alongside the gratitude. Okay, she said. Yeah, okay. We stayed at that table for another hour. We didn't resolve everything, that's not how it works. And I think we both understood that. We talked about other things too. School. Her sister. Something stupid that had happened in a class she was taking. The ordinary texture of being two people who knew each other well, trying to find their way back to the regular frequency of things. It wasn't the same as before. I won't pretend it was, but it was something. And something, I was learning, was often where you had to start. 3 weeks later, I was at a coffee shop near campus, a different one, not the back corner place. Just a regular spot I went to when I needed to work outside my apartment. I was at a table by the window, headphones on, not really listening to anything, mostly staring at a document I was supposed to be editing. A guy sat down across from me. I looked up. His name was Theo. I knew him vaguely from my program, the kind of person you'd waved at in hallways and exchanged 10 words with over the course of a semester. He pointed at the chair across from me as a question. I nodded. He sat down, opened his own laptop, and worked in silence for a few minutes. Then he looked up and said, completely unprompted, without any particular lead-up, "Hey, I heard you came out recently. I just wanted to say I went through something similar a couple years ago. If you ever want to talk, I'm around." He said it the way you'd offer someone directions. Straightforward, no pressure, no performance. Then he looked back at his laptop. I sat there for a second. And here's the thing I've been trying to figure out how to say since this whole story started. The thing that took me the longest to get to. Someone had told Theo. One of the 8 people Jade had told. Or someone they'd told. Or someone down the line from that. The network she'd built without my permission had reached this person sitting across from me at a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon. And because of it, he knew. And because he knew, he'd just offered me something I hadn't asked for, but that landed with a specific, complicated warmth. I didn't choose that. I didn't build it. It was built out of the thing that was taken from me, with pieces of me that weren't Jade's to use, and it was real and present and sitting right across the table. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I took my headphones off and said, "Yeah, I'd like that actually." And we talked. I'm not going to tell you the story ended cleanly. It didn't. Trust. Once it has a fracture in it, doesn't just seal back over it. Heals differently. Leaves a different texture in the place where the break was. Jade and I are still figuring out the shape of what we are now. And some days that's easier than others. My family is okay. Better than okay. In the quiet way that my family does things, no big speeches, no dramatic recalibration, just a slight opening in how we talk to each other. A few degrees more honest than before. And me, I'm somewhere in the middle of it all. Not on the other side yet, but further along than I was. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. The thing I want to leave you with because I think it's the most honest thing I can say. Your story belongs to you. The timing of it, the words of it, the people you tell and the order you tell them, and the version of yourself you choose to bring into each of those rooms. That is yours. It is not anyone else's to manage, or to share, or to decide they're ready for even when you aren't. Good intentions do not transfer ownership. And if someone has taken some of that from you, even someone who loves you, even someone who meant well, you are allowed to grieve it. You are allowed to be angry about it. You are allowed to take your time deciding what comes next. But here is also what I learned. Other people knowing doesn't make the story less yours. It just means the story got out ahead of you, and you can still walk into it. On your own terms, in your own time, even in a coffee shop on a Tuesday, even with a stranger who becomes less of one. If any part of this hit close to home, leave a comment. Tell me your version of this. Tell me about the person you trusted, or the moment you didn't get to have on your own terms, or the Tuesday afternoon that turned into something unexpected. I want to hear it. And if this story meant something to you, you know what to do.